All right, good morning, gentlemen. Bob here, back once again. Going to break down some Bitcoin, getting right down to it. I figured I'd start back with this chart here again. The Brave New Coin Liquidity Index, as you'll see there, or Liquid Index. This one's not perfect because it doesn't specifically track one exchange, so you're not gonna get a perfect representation of the price at the moment based on market. But this is actually fairly close to where even KuCoin is right this moment. It's within a few $100. Yesterday we were still a couple thousand off, but today it has caught up. I only wanted to start here because, again, I actually drew all this. I don't know if anybody remembers this. I drew this weeks ago at this point, and drew that line, drew this kind of, representation as to how I thought it could work. And we ended up getting back to here. Just expected it would come pop up here and give us at least somewhat more of a maybe this could have been another strong bullish fake out, right? This could have been a nasty one, and we would have broken out of here and then broke back down into it. Could have watched Bitcoin going from about 35, 36 straight back down to this level here, 20, but instead of giving us a good strong bullish fake out to the upside of that line, we just got this little bullish fake out right there, roll over. And like I talked about yesterday, and I know I brought it up in one of my prior videos, that daily double top right here, and just that didn't give it enough. It didn't put enough stock in that. But that being stated, we're down here now. All right. So again, there's just no support. There are really no supports here between where we're at the moment. And I mean, I've got this line, but that's, there's very little market structure here. There's probably 2 weeks of trading there, and then a couple of days of trading here from the prior bull run. So, again, this line here is probably our and it might be a little longer term downside target, but this is probably it right here. And in reality, I could probably move this down probably to this level. So really anything between 12 and 13.5, 13.6 is probably a fairly realistic number for us to believe is going to be in the cards at some point. Even if it just wicks down there and then kicks back up. But let's move this just a little bit, put it right there. So let's assume this 12.5 level, let's assume this level does exist, but it's pretty nominal, and we know that already. Again, there's just practically zero market structure here. So what are the chances we just kind of fall through this entire zone and to the downside? I don't know. It's probably fairly strong. Again, I mean, I could click over to a bunch of time frames. This is a daily, but I could click over to a bunch of time frames, and you're going to see exactly what I'm saying here. There's just zero support. I mean, that being stated, let's see how this looks here. Let's say that this thing was a reasonable rising channel or a rising wedge. Yep, right here would be the pullback zone. If we go ahead and assume that this was a double top, then we could go ahead and get a reasonable assessment for the downside target there. Maybe. Let's go ahead and move that back up there. Yeah, so that's pretty good indication there. Double top. Yeah, so 15. Yeah, I mean, so again, we're kind of making our way down to some targets here. Kind of getting a pit stop here. How much love we get from this level? Yeah, that's a good question. Because again, there's just nothing there to support any pricing, and you can see here there's very little volume buying and or selling in this range to facilitate it finding support in this zone. Whereas at least if you get down to here, there's decent levels, but again, they're nominal. So, I mean, it could, this is something where we could certainly see a wick down to and through these levels, and then, come on down here. Does it happen that way? Who knows? Again, there's just no way to say for sure if you get a liquidity event type thing. I mean, this has already been some serious liquidity events going on here. I mean, again, let's click back over to the daily time frame. Look at look at the volume that came in. This is today. I mean, this is a daily candle that still has a fairly significant amount of movement left to go in it, or maybe that's part of how this chart. One other thing I could look at it would be that maybe this actually is a delayed chart. This accommodates yesterday. So there was a boatload of volume that came in today/yesterday that was more than or equivalent to this volume back here. Again, these are the types of things you want to look for to assess if there is the feasibility of a reversal coming in, which is why we were talking about trying to recover from here, was because, again, we got lots of volume there. We got a ton of it, right? And now we've got a significant amount of volume once again. Sometimes that can be breakdown volume, right? Or sometimes that can signify your reversal of a trend. So that's what I'm really looking for at this stage, is to see this thing signify a reversal. The fact that we came down here, tested this upper boundary a few times, couldn't break it, rolled over, trying to find some support here. Again, these are our targets. I mean, we're looking at this point, if 21,000 and change doesn't hold up, which if I come over to this chart, and you can see actually Bitcoin having a decent little go of it here right now. It's just a tiny little 15-minute double bottom at the moment, but it's up a decent chunk in the last 15 minutes, really. But if we go ahead and take a look at some of these other charts here, let's see. Yeah, I think this is the one that we want to actually look at. So I dropped this reverse fib chart on my short-term trading chart recently. And you can see the as far as that part goes, the zero level is up here where we got to recently. The 1.0 fib was at 28,229 that held up decently. Probably could have put the 1 here, but either way, the 2.618, that's a perfect level. I mean, that's it. That, since it's not an extension, if it was the other way around, if I set up the fib chart to represent a retracement of a impulse move to the upside, then this chart would be the other way around. The 2.618 would be above all the pricing action we're seeing here, and that would be like, typically the golden pocket, maybe if you want to call it that, is the 1.618 and that would typically be where, say that you were making an impulse move to the upside or downside. That's normally your like target, if you will, your extended target. And then the 2.618 is typically another good one to look for. Now, it's not to say we won't come down here and get a full fib reverse extension or a regression, if you will. That's not to say none of that will happen, but this would be a good place for us to see some temporary relief from the several days of downside. And again, you can see how the price action is responding now. It lost this level, recovered it, retested. Now the question becomes, can it get through all of these moving averages right here that are all jumbled up? Tough to say right now, but at that point, like, let's say that it does hold this, say it wants to come back down, touch this line, holds it, then we're just looking to see if it breaks this line. If it breaks that line, well, then we can start looking to potentially come back up here and retrace back up the chart a little bit. But, we'll see what happens there. Now, I want to come back to this chart just briefly, because yesterday when we were talking, we weren't quite at these levels, but now we are. So we've been talking about this for a while now, this 200 moving average. And again, I'll go back through it here just briefly. There was a point in time where it hadn't been touched for a long time, right? That's normally when the bull runs are happening. You get this full extension, everything flows, and then it eventually returns back to it. Acts like a magnet. Bounce there, bounce, bounce. And here we are. We got a chance to bounce on it again. Now, this is a weekly chart. You'll see here that during the COVID sell-off last year, we did actually have several days. I could probably say that might have lasted for about a week, where we did wick down below it. But during this week, we wicked down below it, came back up, didn't quite find support on it, but didn't die from it, and then here came back down. We could essentially call this a bearish fake out right here, or even we could just say that we ended up getting a double bottom, a reversal out of there, but had a look of a fake out, given that it did close several days below there. Same concept here. There were several days during this 2-week span of time where it closed below, and then same here. So, the reality is, are we going to close below there? I think there's at least a feasibility that we do, since we're already at it. And, the other times that it just bounced right off, it was right here. It just held, and then the next week it bounced up, came back, retested, and off and running. So, yeah, I think there's a strong chance that we probably do see some days that fall in below here, and especially with this being a weekly chart. And then also, the other thing is, looking at the monthly chart, we've got the 50 moving average there, and we talked about this yesterday too. Anything beyond the 50 hasn't really truly been tested yet. You got this one where it kind of just wicked down close to it. Could this be the time that it actually wicks down onto it? Sure. Yeah, I suppose it could, and then that would give us our retest down here in this 12,000 and change range. And then at that point, I would say I would feel fairly confident that as long as it, and I guess that would be the other thing too. As long as it continues to maintain this uptrend line here, this one, then we bounce off here, and then we make another push to the upside, and at that point, who knows? Maybe this 33.5 level might be it. Although again, I'd still like to see us push back up more into this 47. But now, if we lose this line, and all of a sudden things get pretty serious, right? I think we talked a little bit about this yesterday. Let's say I encapsulated this and I put a line around here. Well, that would be the extent of the measured move there. Let's say it actually fell out right here. Well, all of a sudden now you're looking at a $3,000 price on Bitcoin. So basically it goes back to pre-COVID levels or COVID-19 crash levels. And, I don't know. It's, if you look at this chart and you base something on the volume that's taken place, well, we've had, this is a monthly chart. The monthly chart would suggest that Bitcoin has been rising in price throughout all of this time, and yet during this entirety, for the most part, the volume has actually been falling. Increasing price on decreasing volume is actually a bearish sign, or at least potentially bearish sign. Thus, we are now waiting to see some serious volume come in here to signify the direction that will be maintained. Now, if we come down here and there's this massive spike in volume and then it kicks back up, well, then we could say that in fact perhaps we've got another uptrend that will resume or begin, if you will. But I cannot say that with any level of certainty. We've talked about it fairly extensively. This looks like a double top here. It looks like a rounded top. The adoption curve, when new technologies are being adopted, it would be very common to see an extensive spike over the first number of years, and then a significant lull period. And again, if that happens, then expect that Bitcoin could very well even come down into these levels again. And that's that might be years down the line. Again, we've looked at this chart enough. This is already 5-6 years into the future here. So if in the event that's going to happen, it's not going to happen for a long time. There's the 2024 halving coming up. That should take place somewhere in this range. Is Bitcoin all the way down here by the time that takes place? Who knows? It's feasible. And then you take Bitcoin all the way down here, you get a halving, and perhaps you come back up to this level. 30,000 or 3,000 to 30,000 sounds pretty decent. So, but I do think the at least in the short term, the years of Bitcoin, making like tens of thousands of percent increase is probably fairly unlikely to continue. And that, that's total logic, right? I mean, it's not just going to continue into perpetuity, going up by tens of thousands or 1,000,000% or whatever that ridiculous percentage is. I mean, you can see here there was a point where Bitcoin was worth less than one penny. I'm assuming it's only 2 digits, so you can't see what it might have been below that 1 penny. But nonetheless, I mean, again, adoption, right? It's been being adopted for the last decade. Here's an adoption peak for the moment. All right, and again, none of this is to say that that there aren't a lot of companies out there buying it up and all these institutional investors and yada yada yada. But the simple fact of the matter is, regardless of what that adoption looks like, mainstream adoption is still actually surprisingly, and from a retail standpoint, it's still surprisingly not that extensive. I'd seen something yesterday that suggested that we're just barely pushing to the point of 1 billion users worldwide. So really, we're talking still only a little over 10% of the population, 12% of the population. So the actual widespread adoption of crypto and crypto trading is still not quite there yet, right? But I've seen some different things that suggest that maybe in the next decade we see that number double, triple, or quadruple. At which point, obviously, then I would say that by the time we get to that point, then this garbage would be done, and it would become at that point it would be a market just maybe similar to traditional markets where the adoption is widespread enough that you're not just going to watch this thing crash every 4 years. It's going to be more secular, or that might not be appropriate, but it will go through bull runs that aren't necessarily specific to this coin itself, right? That the entire market will flow. It'll be interesting to see how it all goes, but nonetheless, short term, we don't want to see this line get lost. So really, for now, we sure as hell don't want to fall below 13,000. Okay, ideally we don't fall below this 19, 20, 21 level. Those are the things we want to happen. Whether they happen or not is another story. But again, we'll just keep this thing in mind. We'll keep this trend line in mind. Man, we lose that trend line, and again, just prepare for this thing to come over the course of time, just down further and further. Now, I guess the other question becomes: Do we even get a bounce off of here in a recovery of any kind at this point? I sure hope so. I sure hope so. I don't know what it is, but I vastly more prefer trading this market in the long fashion as opposed to shorting it. And obviously, going long hasn't been particularly beneficial here recently. So, but I'd love to see at least us get some sort of actual recovery and retracement. I mean, 3 months downside, 2 months of garbage, 3 months downside. So, I do think that at the end of June, beginning of July, we could see some level of recovery. But again, I still think that the more likely scenario is that we start pushing back into the back, quarter of the year before we really start to see any kind of true recovery. But, even if we can just sit here and chop sideways for a bit, let's build some market structure in here. We need it. We need to find support. We need to build some market structure. So that's what we're looking for. And again, in the immediate term, we just got to hold these levels. If we wick below, great, no big deal. But if we wick below and then close out and we're below it, then we just got to hope that the next month or the next week we don't put in a lower low. Because that's, when you come back over here, what's the thing that's fairly obvious about the wicks that came down below here? The following week, the wick did not go as low. And you can see that over here as well. You had this red wick. The green never came down further. And then let's zoom in on this little teeny tiny spot here. This one actually does look like it wicked down just slightly lower. It was about 30 cents lower back when Bitcoin was like $200. So I mean, that's the one instance where when you got the red week that came down to the 200, the following week actually did put in a lower low, but it was essentially equivalent, and it was then a double bottom. So that's really how Bitcoin seems to reverse out of these kind of bearish structures, is weekly double bottoms. And again, most of the time it has been in relation to touching down to this level here. And the same thing could be said about the monthly, as we've discussed. The 50 has come into play multiple times, but the 80 has still never really been touched. We're probably going to get there this time. I'm just mentally preparing for that. I'm hopeful that it's not until this makes its way up over here, so we're not just crashing right through this entire zone. Again, I want to see it build some structure, but nonetheless, here we are. Again, now it's all about breaking this trend line. The loss of this level, the recovery, you long that, came back down. It has now retested 15-minute double bottom, still being pushed down by these. So I am more or less expecting that it's probably still going to be some downside, that we probably won't crack through this line just yet. But again, that would be my best guess based on what I'm seeing there. And we could move on over to a short, a little bit longer term time frame. This is the chart I like to keep for the 1 and the 4 hour. And you can see here, the 4 hour, we put in that nice green candle. This red one came in, closed in just below. The one positive being that even though it is a lower low on the price action, it did put a higher low in on the RSI. So this could actually lead to some level of a bullish divergence from here to there. And you can already see that this one had a bullish divergence. So there is some level of feasibility. This thing could spring up out of here. Let's go ahead and get a trend line on here while we're staring at it. And yeah, you can see here that very well could be, based on the 4 hour chart. That's got some feasibility that it actually could be a breakout of sorts with a retest. So I think that is some feasibility, and then that was a fake out, and we can look back here and say, yeah, that was probably a fake out at this point. So, and then the cascade down. Yeah, at this point, just gotta hope that this thing indeed does essentially become a bullish divergence, and to an extent, I guess we'll call it a double bottom, and that this thing actually does start to recover up into here. But I would say that any upside at this point is capped probably in this 23.5 range, maybe, or say 24. If it gets above 24, then we can maybe start talking about a recovery to this 28.5 level. But for right now, again, this is where we're at, and we do at least have a chance to make some movement out of here. So going to be looking for that. Once again, looking for the positive side of things. Coming on over here to my daily, weekly chart. Oversold levels on the weekly. Oversold levels on the daily. So again, something's got to give at some point. We can come back over here and look at this, and you can see that we got, when we got oversold recently, this is what it looked like, and then we chopped sideways for a bit. So we oversold here, chopped sideways, and then we're up to here for a bit. Sure, feasibility for sure. But man, for the love of goodness, let's get something going here. This eventually, this thing has got to stop this downside, and whether it's all the way down here when it happens is anybody's guess. But that is the bottom as far as I could possibly see, is that somewhere in that 13 to 15 range, it's got to find an absolute bottom, unless we actually do go through, like I said, that kind of that adoption curve where we've had all this upside movement for so long, and then it needs to go into relative obscurity for a little bit. Honestly, who knows? Maybe even lose some of those billion worldwide users for a bit, just because, obviously if the space becomes kind of sleepy, if you will, if it goes into a significant winter, then the result is going to be people leaving the market. But nonetheless, here we are. Downside target again. At this point, assume that 13,000 will be the absolute low for the time being. Assume that chances are pretty good we will see at least some level of support here as we make our way down. We'd really love to see 21.7 hold up and give us at least a little retracement. And then upside targets, again, they're limited to 23 and change, 25 for now, 28 if we were really lucky. But in the short term, just assume that it probably won't get back above this level and or this level. So that's where we're at. That's what we got. Appreciate you as always. Looking forward to talking again. And hey, let's find some gains out here. Have a good one.